All right. Welcome back to 2SkeGEEKS. I'm your boy, Will Call, and I'm hanging out today with a special show and a special guest. I'm going to pass the mic over to his brother to introduce himself.
How you doing? My name is KBrew, and I've known Will Call since our college days, and glad to be on the show today.
Hey, man, it is an esteemed pleasure to have you with us. And yeah, as it has been an esteemed pleasure to know you all these years, from even when you came to interview to get in the fraternity, and you've been a good brother since then till now, and it was just been a blessing. Yeah, exactly. So the reason why we're having brother KBrew or KBrew on the show is because of the fact that we're gonna twist the show a little bit, because we want to do a little, we're into sci-fi and comic books, and this subject here is sci-fi and comic and fantasy related. In this case, we're talking about by the via of his t-shirt, Dungeons and Dragons. And so I'm really excited about this because of the fact that there are tons and tons of players across the globe and in our country, and even where he is in his local town to where he plays, but they play virtually. And but I'm not gonna steal his thunder. I'm gonna let him explain, because I'm just gonna start with some questions first, like what is D&D?
All right, sure. That's a good place to start. So Dungeons and Dragons is probably the one of the oldest forerunner of a type of game playing called tabletop role-playing games. You know, it started from war games. You've seen maybe these old movies where generals, you know, stand around a table and they've got a terrain and they've got little figures for their troops. And some gentlemen in Geneva, Wisconsin, you know, were hobbyists who were into making those miniatures and those terrains and playing those war games. But they also were big fans of fantasy novels like J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit. And they had the idea of, like, why can't we combine these two things together, right? Instead of let's take these epic battles, but also these small individual heroes. Instead of just having a big battle with thousands of troops and we just say we're going to move this unit over here, what if it was just a hero? And let's take these kinds of characters that from the Lord of the Rings, like a wizard and the ranger Aragorn, and the halfling who's kind of like a roguish little thief guy who's likable. Right. Let's make up our stories and make our own adventures, and let's do that instead of just playing, you know, war games.
Right.
And so they created this game, Dungeons and Dragons, as a fantasy-based game to play the role of your fantasy hero, right? You know, fantasy was the genre that they started with. Now, the game Dungeons and Dragons has went on and spawned spin-offs upon spin-offs upon spin-offs. It's a whole industry now. And you can do any kind of genre. If you don't like fantasy, you can do role-playing games that are based on, you know, science fiction, or based on comic books.
Right.
So Gothic Horror is another one. So
Yeah. And is that one of the newer ones, the Gothic Horror? Is that one of the newer ones, or has that been around for a while too?
You know, different games, the genres there, even within Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is kind of like Marvel Cinematic Universe with the various movies, kind of, even they're all superhero movies, they may have a little different movie genre. Like if you think of like Captain America, the first Avenger, that was a period war movie. Captain America, Winter Soldier was more of a political thriller.
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons also can have genres. So they've had a Gothic Horror with Dungeons and Dragons version of Dracula called Strahd.
Okay.
The Curse of Strahd. So it's a very popular, let's just say, adventure that they've written that, you know, people can then play within that, and it's Gothic Horror. But since then, right, Dungeons and Dragons, as I said, can have different genres within itself, but then there are other entire role-playing game systems. There's one called Vampire the Masquerade. which
Okay.
is which is a separate role-playing game apart from Dungeons and Dragons, but that is its kind of style, where you're a little in the Gothic horror. You play one of several types of vampire families,
Okay.
and whatever their intrigue and whatever story that the players want to make within that kind of realm in that genre is possible.
Okay. So to get to know how you got into D&D, I'm going to pose that question to you. Like, how did you start? How and why? Really?
Sure. Well, let's see. I started in middle school. I lived on a Navy base, and so a lot of the friends in my neighborhood. I honestly don't know where we first came across it. Probably in the store, right? At the time when I started, I think it was maybe the first one was Advanced Edition. There was a little box. You could buy a little box set with one or two books, some dice, and instructions. And so my friends and I, about four of us, got to playing and played all through middle school. And then I transferred away, moved from that base, and high school. I played a little bit in the ninth grade, but as we were getting older, kind of got interested in other things.
Yeah, you matured.
Mature, and also that was the that was the mid to late 80s.
Yeah.
And at that time, the Dragons was also getting this bad publicity about again, anything new, anything that involves the youth that the parents don't necessarily understand,
Yeah.
right? You get a reaction. And so Dungeons and Dragons being a fantasy game, there's a lot of themes, and they draw upon a lot of characters, a lot of myths, a lot of mythologies. They pull from different mythologies, like Norse mythology. Like, so you have the Norse gods, a lot of Celtic mythology, a lot of Christian mythology or biblical mythology. So Dungeons and Dragons had the concept of demons and devils. And again, because it's a fantasy game, you're playing an epic hero. Epic heroes have to have epic villains.
Yeah, a villain, enemy. Yeah.
You have to have enemies to conquer. And so there was a term called a satanic panic, where people thought, and it came about part because of the media, like not the media, but Hollywood. So there was some movie, I can't remember the name of it, but I remember Tom Hanks. It was kind of one of his earliest movies, where the subject of the movie was college kids playing a role playing game.
Right.
There was Dungeons and Dragons. They didn't legally use the name.
Right, but still.
Went on to commit some murders, and then people don't separate fiction from fact, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Well, not when it's convenient. When it's convenient, they don't.
Right. This game must be, it's corrupting our kids. They're devil worshiping.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that case at all. It never had been. But it took a hit in popularity for a number of years. And just recently, over the last 10 years, the game is it was kind of like an underground thing where, it was considered geeks who played it, nerds. It wasn't really something you bragged about for a number of years until probably within the last 10 years or so. Then it started picking back up steam. And then I picked it up personally when COVID hit, when we kind of had the lockdown in 2019. I called some friends of mine, one of which had a similar story to myself, where he played in middle school. And, he and I were like, yeah, man, this game used to be a whole lot of fun. And, it's kind of died down. And I mean, I was like, so we got together and said, hey, man, we're about to be on lockdown, not going outside. And that's like, let's try to start playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I say, I found a software application that allows you to play it virtually. Because that was the other thing. Normally it is played around a tabletop. It has been. And you guys have gone to comic stores. A lot of times in the comic book stores or a hobby store, there'd be a couple of back rooms where people would play Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah.
Other places, go to a bar or lounge, back room, people might be playing poker. right? Comic book store, people are going to be playing Dungeons and Dragons or other role playing games. And so we found that there were some applications. There's a few of them. We picked one where, kind of simulates that tabletop experience, but it's all.
What do you guys use?
The one we use is called Roll20.
Okay.
Another competitor to it is Foundry, but we use Roll20, and you can think of it as Zoom optimized for Dungeons and Dragons or it uses other role-playing games. Matter of fact, I'm going to change my background. Just show you a little screenshot of a play session of my team and I. So if you look there, you'll see on one side of the screen is a set of numbers. Those are the dice rolls.
Okay.
And then you can see we have video chat, and then you have a little background image. This is helping the dungeon master, who's the narrator of the adventure, to tell the story, and he's using imagery to paint the picture that we're in a dark, dank, overgrown forest.
Right.
So that this is the setting, that the story is taking place within at that point, at that one moment in time.
So I hate to dig into too much of a detail, but I got to know. So you said that one side of your stuff is with the dice roll. Is that automated? Or you guys like physically roll the dice and say what the dice say, or is that an automated?
Well, so the answer is yes. You can have physical dice, and I have one set right here. Let's see if my
there you go, right there. Yep, I can see it now.
So they're different sides. Most people, when they think of dice, that's a 6-sided dice. It's kind of dice you play craps with, right? It has 6 sides. Game of Dungeons and Dragons has that 6-sided dice, but also 4-sided dice. So it's like a pyramid. 4-sided, 6, 8-sided, 10-sided, 12-sided, and 20-sided die.
Yep.
The 20-sided die is the one that you use the most, actually.
Okay.
But your question was, which do you? So do you roll the dice? Yes, you can. But these applications, like I said, you could consider them like a Zoom, but optimized for playing the game. They have basically automatic random number generators.
Okay.
So we can tell it. I can simply tell it, I need to roll 8-sided dice 3 times, total up those numbers.
Got it.
And you hit a button, boom, it does it. In this case, we could say, I'm going to actually attack with my long sword, and I need you to roll the 20-sided dice, add my plus and minuses from my character sheet, and I need you to do it twice.
Got it.
Depending on the situation. Depending on the situation, you either pick your first roll, or you pick your highest roll or your lowest roll.
Right.
And for people that we haven't explained that part yet, what makes it a game is really the dice rolls. So if it's just storytelling, you and I could tell a story and we just be making up stuff.
I got company.
All right. It's a handsome dog. But what makes it a game and not just collaborative storytelling, which it is that.
Yeah.
What makes it a game is the dice rolls. I can tell you my hero is going to do something truly amazing. I'm going to jump 20 feet and stab the orc. It's like, you got to roll the dice. Dice says whether I actually did stab the orc or I missed
it. Exactly. Or he blocked it or something. Yeah.
Right. And then depending on what the roll says, then the narrator, who's called the dungeon master, adjusts the story accordingly. And now I have to respond accordingly. If I hit it, he can subtract how many points it had, in its life, called hit points, and it's either still living or I killed it, right?
Right.
If I missed it, he's like, you missed it. When this time comes around, it's probably going to hit you, or is it going to try to hit you? And then he's got to roll a dice for it, and it might hit me, it might miss me.
Right, right.
And so that's kind of a little snippet of how combat is played, but the dice rolls.
It's like real life. Because yeah, you can, if in a fight or whatever, you can try to punch, but the joker might miss, or you might miss, or the joker ducks, or the block, or whatever the case may be. And of course, there's another follow-on consequence with that. So,
and that's what makes it fun, is the dice are not always in your favor, and the thing that you were trying to do don't work out, and now you have to think about, now, how do I adjust? How do I overcome this other challenge? I thought I was going to do this, or I missed that orc, and then the orc's turn came around and hit me. I've got 5 hit points left. When my turn comes around, do I hit him back, or do I try to run away?
right.
Or, do I play dead? Do I
Right.
talk?
And what about like with team decisions? Like if you're playing with more, if you're like in a team of players, how does that decision making go across? Like, hey, we just gonna just break as a team. Is that something you have to do as an individual, or is the team just says, hey, Dungeon Master, as a team, we want to roll and we want to run? How does that?
Yeah. So you brought up one good point. Most Dungeons and Dragons games are played with, a group of players. Maybe 4 to 8 players is a good number. It can be played. Actually, they have written things that can just be played solo. Which is, that's one extreme.
Right.
Or one dungeon master and then 1 player. But 4 to 8 people is good. And it is, the reason it is because when you create your heroic character, you can't make them perfect. There's going to be things that they're strong at, things that they're weak at. The team, your buddy, creates a different character, and then they're going to have some strengths that your character doesn't, and they're going to be weak in some areas where your character has strength. So as a group, and in our case, there are 5 of us who play. 1 person is the dungeon master, and 4 of us are the players. So say we have a 4-person team. And to answer your question, we collaborate together. We are a team, so we're trying to succeed as a group.
Right.
And in the game, everybody has their turn kind of decide what their character is going to do in character. And we could say, hey, we're all going to run. And the dungeon master then has to determine, okay, what are the impacts of you all running? So when usually doing combat, it's usually on one person does their thing, then the next person does their thing, the next person does their thing. So it could be, we're all going to run. He said, well, we still have an order that you guys have to act within. So KBrew, you're up next. Well, I'm just going to run away. Well, there's a rule that says if you run away, like you're just running, you kind of drop your guard.
Right.
You decided to just run. So that enemy that you're running from, he gets a free hit. Now, I could have said, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to run away. I'm going to disengage from this monster and back 20 feet away. In which case, that means disengage means I'm going to keep my guard up. He's not going to get a free swing at me.
Right, right.
So, just like a fight, right? If you're boxing somebody, if you turn around and run away, that person's going to hit you in the back of the head. Right. But if you keep your guard up and you start backing away, then they're not going to land a hit on you.
Right.
So let's say I decide to do that. My next player may say, what I'm going to do is cast a spell that's going to, he looks through their list of spells that he can cast and says, okay, I'm going to cast a web spell on this creature, and that's going to cause us. And then Dungeon Master said, well, describe what that spell does. And so then my buddy was like, oh, well, I cast out thick yellow strands of sticky webbing, and it goes around this thing and starts wrapping itself around his legs and his arm. Right. Okay, we have to roll the dice to see if the thing actually, you hit it, or if it was able to kind of duck out the way or slice at the webs as they were being formed magically. So Dungeon Master may roll the dice, says, he failed, so now he's stuck in the webbing. Now, because he's stuck in the webbing, he can't move to follow KBrew's character, right? And so then the next person plays, right? He's like, well, if he's stuck, I'm gonna start shooting arrows at him. Right. Well, because he's stuck, now you can roll the dice twice, and then you take the higher one, because that's called, you have advantage because he's stuck. He can't really move. He doesn't have as much freedom of movement. So that's how kind of the combat is played, and that's why the dice rolls come in, and we can collaborate together that way, right? You can say, well, he moved away. I protected him with a web spell, and other guys say, well, while he's stuck, I'm not gonna run up on him. I'm just gonna stand back and shoot him with bow and arrow. And that's a way that combat could occur, right?
Okay. So, okay. So, because you've mentioned them several times now, so can you just define for us the role of the dungeon master to the game? Because I know that's pretty much the key.
Yeah. So there are two types when you play. There's really two types of, let's say, players. The dungeon master. In some systems, only Dungeons and Dragons actually can call them a dungeon master. Other role-playing games have to call them game master. Dungeons and Dragons trademark that specific.
Right.
There's a whole nother episode you can put on just the epic legalities of what Dungeons and Dragons has kind of gone through.
We ain't gonna deal with it.
But we don't get into that now. But so the dungeon master, and then the rest are just called player characters, right? So the dungeon master. First of all, I was about to say the dungeon master is like the key player, but that's not true. Everybody's equally responsible for making it a fun experience. The dungeon master is the one person who volunteered to kind of take on a larger load than everybody else. The dungeon master is the narrator of the adventure. So think of it as like you're a director and a script writer. You have to have the general plot, but Dungeons and Dragons is a collaborative storytelling. So you don't have. It would be wrong to try to write a plot to each and every dialogue point. Think of it as writing almost like a Saturday Night Live. Well, it's not even that. Like if you go to improv theater.
Yeah.
So you write the setup. The player characters are improvising the actual dialogue and the actual action that's going to happen. So the dungeon master is that narrator. He's got the kind of general setup. He's also dungeon master role is also as a referee. So the dungeon master's ruling on the rules is final.
Right.
And those are the two main responsibilities of the dungeon master is to frame the story, keep the story going, keep the player characters engaged, and adjudicate the rules.
Right.
The player character's job is to create a character that they're playing with and embody that character, right? Like their one job is to kind of know their character, what they're good at, what they're not good at. And that's what I call, those things are recorded on what's called a character sheet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The best analogy is you look at you've ever played Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, any card-based games where there's different stats and there's a different points and there are things that counter other things. A character sheet is kind of like that. Another analogy is you look at trading cards, like sports trading cards, or even superhero trading cards, right? There's power levels. There's a different power level between the Hulk and Daredevil. They're both strong, but if you had to score them, you put a numerical score, the Hulk's score would be huge, right? Daredevil would be much lower. In Dungeons and Dragons, you could say, I have a barbarian whose strength is 20.
We're gonna get ready to pause and then come back.
Okay.